My name's Nick. I started Nick's Electronics Repair about 10 years ago, and since then we have fixed over 25,000 devices. In today's video, we're going to be fixing a Vizio with model number M50-C1. When I power it on, I do get my standby light, but I don't get any picture at all on screen. The screen remains completely dark. So we're going to open it up and find out what's going on. For this diagnostic, there is no need for any fancy tools, multimeters, oscilloscopes, or anything like that. The answer is, it's always the main board. The M50-C1 I have never seen with a power supply or LED driver board failure. 99.9% of the time, if you have the standby light turn on, but when you press the power you don't get picture or backlight, the main board has failed. More specifically, the processor chips that are on the main board have cracked solder joints between the processor and the PCB itself. Those solder joints over time will crack because of thermal expansion and contraction. The expansion happening every time the TV is turned on and warms up, and the contraction that happens every time the TV is turned off and cools down occurs at different rates on the processor than it does on the PCB. That creates strain and microfractures in the solder joints. So that's what we're going to show you exactly how we fix. Now, in order to do that, we do need to remove the main board out of circuit. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, if you're not sure how to remove the main board or the back cover from this TV, we will have a video linked at the very end that you can check out. Now let's bring the main board to our workbench to get it prepped for repairs. In order for us to be able to work on this board, we do need to remove the heatsink first, which is soldered down on the board. Additionally, there are 3 thermal pads that we need to remove in order for us to be able to rework the main board. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is remove our pads, and they are on there with adhesive that can be very difficult to remove. So we're going to need to use some tools, and we are most likely going to need to clean this in a isopropyl alcohol bath. Now, the whole idea of reworking these boards is essentially going to mean that we're going to be heating the board both from the bottom and the top at the same time until we reach the solder's melting point. And now if we do that while we have adhesive or thermal pad on the back, it's going to create some pretty toxic fumes. So we definitely want to make sure we properly clean the boards before we put them on that machine. Now, these pads are not going to be reusable, but we will put on brand new ones once we're done with the repairs. Now, we also get this question a lot in regards to this discoloration that looks like either oxidation of some sort or corrosion. That, I believe, is actually residual flux left over on the board that is starting to oxidize perhaps, but we will clean it off. It's not actually going to damage the board or prevent the board from working properly. So if your board looks like this, that's actually okay. And some of these pads are very difficult to properly remove in one go. Okay, and that's going to be good enough for our 2 pads. There is still some adhesive on there that we need to clean off, but we're going to do that with a brush and isopropyl alcohol. We just wanted to get about 90–95% of it off. Now for this one, we should be able to just lift it off. And it looks like one of the pads I was able to remove cleanly, the other one not so much. And again, this is just double-sided adhesive tape. We will also be replacing that once we're done with our repairs. So these are our very large joints right here and right here. Those are 2 of them that are soldered down to the board for the heatsink. So we're going to use our desolder pump. We're going to start by adding a little bit of solder here. All right, there we go. I can see some decent flow on the joint now. Oh, there we go. That looks good. So let's see. Might be hard to show on camera, but we can now pull that through. Let's go ahead and do the same thing with the next one. We'll add some solder first. Get really good flow. We have another joint here. There we go, very good flow. All right, so those first 3 joints are coming through. We're halfway done. We have 3 more. All right, let's try it without adding new solder. Oh, that still worked. Okay. And our very last one up here. Let's do no solder again. And there we go. Our heatsink just came off. So these are the 2 processors we're going to be reflowing today. We're going to remove the old crusty paste first before we dunk it in our isopropyl alcohol bath. And the reason for is to try and keep the bath as clean as possible. So we don't need to be 100%, but just get the majority. And again, we will be replacing it with high quality MX-4 thermal paste once we are done with the repairs and confirm that everything is working as it should. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and give it a bit of a scrub. Just clean off some of that residual thermal paste on the chips. And we are using a boar's hair brush. And then on the back, we want to scrub the areas where the processors are. There is a lot of oil residue and that adhesive residue from those thermal pads. And that's the important thing that we want to remove here. All right, we'll give it just a light brushing on the rest of the board. All right, and that should be good enough. We're gonna go ahead and let the board dry out for a little bit. Then we're gonna do a preheat baking cycle before we start our rework. Using our rework machine, we are going to resolder the solder balls between the processor and the PCB. The whole rework process takes about 6 minutes in total. We are now just about 1/3 of the way in and are going to add some flux on the perimeter of the chip. The reason we wait for the board to heat up a bit before applying flux is so that it pulls towards the center of the chip more easily. Now we will wait until the end of the cycle and then prod the chip to confirm we have good solder flow. Because we can see the chip move and bounce back to its original position, we know we have good solder flow, confirming we have renewed the bonds between the processor and the PCB. Next, we are going to reflow the second processor chip. Here in this final clip, you can see the solder balls cooling back down and going from a liquid state to a solid state. So the repairs are completed to the main board, but before we live test it, we do need to reattach that heatsink and make sure we have good thermal dissipation. What that means is we also need to clean up this heatsink. Now the thermal paste on here is pretty crusty, so we're actually going to use a metal tool to remove it, at least the bulk of it. And then we'll use this metal brush to get some of the rest. And finally, we're going to use a Q-tip with some isopropyl alcohol. And we'll go ahead and repeat the process off screen for this one. Okay, both of the pads are prepped, and so the heatsink is ready to be installed back onto the main board. Now we can go ahead and put some thermal paste on the CPU dies. Now that's not going to be enough. I'm just putting a little bit, and we're going to put some good pressure here. Go ahead and remove it. Let's take a look. And actually I was wrong. That's pretty good. Oh, you know what? This one right here on the corner, there is a little bit missing, so we'll just add a little more there. So let's go ahead and put this back on. And now what I'm going to do next is I'm putting even pressure with the board upside down. I'm putting pressure right here and right here, which is the back of the processors. And now that I know everything is nice and flush, we can go ahead and solder it down. And what I'm going to do here is put pressure again on both processors at the same time. And I'm soldering down the middle pin of the heatsink while applying that pressure to make sure it is nice and flush. Now we're going to do the same thing over here. I'm gonna get enough solder on that joint, get a good flow. Again, put pressure on both of the CPUs, processors. And we'll keep repeating that process throughout. And while I do have high confidence that this main board is properly fixed, before we do install the thermal pads for the back of the PCB, we are gonna live test it right now. All right, we've reinstalled the main board back into the TV. We're gonna give it some power. Let's see, do we get our standby light? We do have our standby light. We'll have to wait a second for it to fade away. Now we can power it on. And let's see, do we have a picture? Okay, and we do have a picture. Backlight is on. Obviously, our V logo is present. So we're gonna let it boot in all the way, and then we're gonna check to make sure that all of the HDMI audio and video work. And it does look like our HDMIs are working, but before we seal it up, let's go ahead and put those thermal pads back on the back. So we're gonna go ahead and install two 8mm pads. The first one's gonna go right here on the back of the main processor. The second one goes over here. And finally, we have our large plate, which will go over here, but we need to put some adhesive on here. So I have some double-sided adhesive pads from 3M, and they are ever so slightly thicker than the actual gray pads here, so that they can attach to the board, but they are foam pads, so they will compress with the pressure so that they can become smaller and allow for that heat transfer on those actual gray silicone pads. Here we are. Lining it up best I can here, just eyeballing it. And now we have successfully completed our repairs. And as promised, we have a video over here that you can check out for the back cover removal and mainboard removal. If you are interested in sending in your mainboard for us to fix, we will have links to our website, which include flat rate services for the repair of these mainboards, which come with a 1-year warranty, and that'll be linked in the description below. If you found the content helpful or useful, make sure to leave us a like, subscribe for more, and thank you for watching.